this big, you can make way more money
doing basketball, doing
football,
doing
like being on an arena football team, not even making it to the NFL. You can make just as much money, if not more money, than most of the UFC heavyweights on the roster. Ginger
and the Bear.
And guys, we're going to tell you why, despite being the largest humans in the UFC, the heavyweights are actually the least likely to smash that like button because they're the worst. Don't be like a heavyweight. Smash it down below.
Anyway, the heavyweight division of the UFC, I'm not saying boxing because I have a sweet spot in my heart for boxing heavyweights, but the
boxing heavyweights have a sweet in their spot, in their stomach.
Absolutely. But the heavyweight UFC fighters, except for Stipe Miocic and DC, have time and time again shown that they are the shallowest division and
in the UFC, despite being the most likely to survive in a shallow pool. The issue, I think, is that, frankly, there's really no incentive if you are truly a human that is of that size to pick going into MMA as opposed to doing boxing, football, basketball, all sports that are selective for larger humans, like being bigger and frankly being like in the 5th percentile for height, so being taller than 95% of all other humans in the face of the earth or just in the United States.
Unless you're Mark Hunt.
Unless you're Mark Hunt. Why would you want to go into MMA where even if you're one of the best 15 MMA fighters in the world, like let's say you're the 15th best MMA fighter in the world, how much money are you making? You're lucky if you're making maybe $250,000 a year, maybe, off of the actual pay. Whereas if you're the 15th best basketball player or you're the 15th best football player, you're making tens of millions of dollars.
Well, and not only that, but you can tell when somebody who's only been training, you know, striking and whatnot for only like 3 years, like
Greg Hardy, bro.
Oh, Greg Hardy too. Oh yeah, like Greg Hardy is able to actually perform relatively well in
like
the UFC.
I'd say very well in the heavyweight division.
Yeah, no,
like he's won fights. He gave Volkov, who's a ranked heavyweight, a hard fought match. Yep. He's been training in the UFC for like a year.
Yep.
And Francis Ngannou 3 years, and he's a perennial contender, one of the best in the division.
Right.
And you just will not see this happen anywhere else on the card. And that comes down to the fact, like, there just are not that many human beings walking the face of the earth that actually fit the weight requirements.
Like when have you ever seen somebody in middleweight or lightweight? They say like, oh, I've only been training MMA for 3 years,
Never.
And now I'm going to fight Khabib.
In the 90s, maybe. And I think a lot of people have misconceptions as well, because it's hard to actually get perspective for how tall fighters are and how big fighters are, and especially because UFC referees tend to be incredibly large human beings, which just skews everybody's perspective. But if you've ever met fighters in real life, guys, lightweight, right? Despite the name lightweight, lightweights are actually like slightly above average size human beings if you meet them in real life. People don't realize, like, 155 pounds, that's not what lightweights walk around at. If they're not in camp, lightweights walk around anywhere from 190 all the way up to 215.
Yeah, people were saying that Khabib, before he got onto his nutrition stuff, was like 200 pounds. 200
pounds. Yeah. And they cut down to 155. These are like big dudes. They're guys you would meet in real life and be like, oh,
that's
like
a big guy.
Yeah, that's a big guy, and that's at lightweight. Then you scale up to middleweight. Middleweights are probably just about the biggest guy you're gonna meet in like a 6-month period. Like, no joke.
Yeah.
Like Luke Rockhold is like 6'3", 6'4", I believe, and walks around at like 230 pounds.
Yeah.
That's just a ginormous human being. Then you get up to like light heavyweight and heavyweights. There's just not that many guys that are that big. And it's not like boxing. Like, in boxing, there's a really unique situation where if guys can fight at cruiserweight, which would sort of be like parallel to our light heavyweight, they won't want to fight at cruiserweight
because they won't get paid.
There's not nearly as much prestige around cruiserweight, and cruiserweight is just one weight class lighter than heavyweight. If you're at cruiserweight, that doesn't have the marquee heavyweight boxing title. And so anyone who is like any good at cruiserweight will go up to heavyweight. Deontay Wilder is a natural cruiserweight.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Evander Holyfield was a cruiserweight who went up to heavyweight. And MMA, you can make just as much money fighting at 205.
Yeah.
So
I think it speaks volumes. So when Derek Lewis was starting up his career, they asked him, why did you go to MMA and not boxing? And he said that MMA was just much easier than boxing. And
I think he said for heavyweight especially.
For heavyweight.
Like even more so at heavyweight.
And I'm sure he was just chatting shit. But honestly, could you imagine Derek Lewis versus Deontay Wilder? Could you imagine Derek Lewis versus fucking Anthony Joshua? Any of the top guys. And
not even that. Derek Lewis versus like the B class heavyweight boxers. Ortiz.
Like Ortiz. Ortiz
would murder Derek Lewis in the ring. And like top 50 boxers. Any heavyweight top 50.
What's insane is that boxers in the heavyweight division of boxing, they can go their whole entire 12 rounds, and I know their 12 rounds are 3 minutes, but they obviously have way more endurance than UFC heavyweights.
I'd say aside from like the top 3 to 5 guys that you've mentioned, the UFC heavyweights are chronically terribly trained. And that's on top of everything else. And I think it's just what we're saying, like, why would you not to get Ayn Rand in this bitch, but like competition drives innovation, right? When there's not like there's not enough incentive to drive heavyweights to really like get their cardio right, to really do everything, which to be fair is more difficult as a bigger man. But when you have like heavyweights, like you're saying, Tyson Fury, the man's dancing in the 12th round. There's maybe like Stipe has that kind of cardio, maybe,
yeah.
And I just think it's really interesting because everyone keeps saying like, oh, you know, the heavyweight division eventually it's going to just get rounded out. MMA keeps getting bigger, it's going to round out. I don't think it's just going to happen as long as USA remains the primary feeder for the UFC. It's not going to happen because, frankly, if you're this big, you can make way more money
doing basketball, doing
football, doing like being on an arena football team, not even making it to the NFL. You can make just as much money, if not more money, than most of the UFC heavyweights on the roster.
So I think everybody will agree. If you want to get into the Olympics, if you want to get into a high echelons of combat sports, you're gonna start training your kids from a very, very, very young age. And if there's no money involved in that, parents have zero incentives, at least in the United States, to have them train. And also, especially when everybody knows they're going to get CTE, if they start training earlier, right?
Especially when you look at it, and a lot of combat sports history are really tied to impoverished communities. Like boxing, if you look at the history of boxing, the majority of champions in America, at least, it was always whatever group was the most impoverished at the time, because it's a way that people see that you can fight your way out of poverty. When there's not these, like, and relatively speaking, boxers make so much more money than MMA fighters. So like you're saying, if it's a money-motivated decision, why would you ever put your kid in MMA as opposed to boxing? Especially if you're like, if you're the Fury family and you know you have a pretty good chance that sperm is going to end up being a 6'6" behemoth. Why wouldn't you do heavyweight boxing, the biggest paycheck you could possibly catch, if you're combat sports? And if you're an American, why wouldn't you put your kid in football or basketball? It's really frustrating. And on top of that, the 265-pound weight limit makes zero sense. But that's a 265 is ridiculous. So stupid. It's so stupid.
If Andy Ruiz can fucking like fight
and beat Anthony Joshua,
he was like 160 something. But then even in the rematch when he lost, he was still boxing the whole entire time.
It was still a decision,
and he was almost 300 fucking pounds.
It's just ludicrous, and he's not even tall. Like he's 6'1" or so, isn't he?
He's 6'2".
6'2". So I just think that's completely arbitrary and ridiculous. That's a whole nother video that we'll get into. But guys, I do still have hope for the UFC heavyweight division. I just think it's contingent on MMA getting and continuing to get bigger in countries that have a very high average population size, that don't have a boxing history, and that don't have a sport that's big in that country that specifically selects for the really large body type, like a football or like a basketball. That being said, we'll see if that actually happens. Maybe the Pacific Islands, maybe some countries in Africa, maybe some countries in Asia, maybe China, if China gets more into MMA.
But like Samoans and not Somalis, the people from the Maoris, right? They have a long, illustrious, prestigious career in boxing.
That's true.
At heavyweight,
That's
specifically.
true.
Anyway,
We just need about 30,000 Mark Hunts to just start smashing each other up through the heavyweight division.
yeah, and not Bamba Tuivasa, not him.
If you guys disagree with us, because I think there's 2 or 3 other weight classes that we could have made this video about, tell us down below what you think is the worst division in MMA. Because I will say, heavyweight is the worst division talent-wise. It might not be the worst division entertainment-wise. So it's very hit or miss.
No,
so
well,
there's arguments you can definitely make for other divisions in the UFC being the worst.
Well, no, I think if you want to talk about flyweight, I mean, most of their fights I think are pretty entertaining.
Well, they're not gassing. But they're not gassing. Like, you'll have like a bad heavyweight fight is a stinker.
It's terrible.
Nothing stinks like a bad heavyweight fight, and that's
Nothing.
not just because there's more like sweat being produced by these enormous human beings.
But when a heavyweight fight delivered,
women's featherweight.
Women's featherweight's pretty bad, but I think it's the same position as men's heavyweight.
It's just that the population size is sexual dimorphism, whatever.
Anyway, if you guys disagree with us, if heavyweight division is your favorite division, let us know, please.
Be loud. Be
loud,
proud.
be proud,
Go off,
yeah.
queen.
All right.
Later, Ginger.
Bear.
We out.